Okay, good afternoon or good morning, but good noon to everybody. I'm Dr. Warren Doctor. I'm the President and CEO of the East Tennessee Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you all to our brown bag lunch. I'm glad to see we've got a really full house today. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out and supporting the ETHS for all that we do. And I'd just like to say that if you're not a member, I'd love for you to join the East Tennessee Historical Society because it goes to helping put on these sorts of events and these sorts of talks. I should also say that if you've not been to our World's Fair anniversary exhibit, it is open in the back, and it is a really fantastic exhibit about the 1982 World's Fair. If you've not seen that yet, I would love for you to have a look at it. I would also like to say some of the upcoming events that we have here is on July 13th. We have William Hardy, who will be discussing Reconstruction in East Tennessee under Governor DeWitt Center. And later on in the month, on July 28th in the evening at 7 p.m., we have Bo Roberts, who will be coming and talking about his book on his experiences in the 1982 World's Fair, which we're very much looking forward to. He'll also be signing books, so that's very exciting. Other big news is just to say that my mom and stepdad and aunt are here, and I just want to welcome them, and I hope that I make them proud. Thank you very much. But the real news is that a good friend of the Society is speaking here today, Dr. Chris Magra. He is a professor of early American history and a director for the Center of the Study of War and Society at the University of Tennessee. And his prize-winning research has explored the maritime dimensions of the American Revolution, and he's published 2 books with Cambridge University Press, so we're sort of Cambridge buddies in that way. And so without further ado, I would like to turn over to Chris. I'm very much looking forward to this talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Warren. I'm so grateful to my good friends here at the East Tennessee Historical Society, Warren Doctor and Lisa Oakley, who's at the back. They work tirelessly to bring the history of our region to the masses, and I think that's worth supporting. I'm a member here at the ETHS. I hope you all will become members. My family's members. We come here all the time. That World's Fair exhibit is awesome. I particularly love the buttons, the World's Fair buttons. Whoever put those on display, thank you for that. And thank you all for coming. Those of you here in attendance, I appreciate you being here. Those of you who are at home, zooming in, welcome. I want to do something real quick, and I want to make sure you can all hear me. Everybody in the room can hear me just fine. Those of you in the back, no problems hearing me right now. Okay? Any of you at home, if you have problems hearing me, why don't you just turn your volume up, that might help, but also let us know in the chat if you're having any problems. Okay, now everybody ready for this? Big step here. I'm gonna step a little bit away from the podium. Are we still all good? Everybody hear me back there? Okay. Now I'm gonna step over here. Can everybody hear me over there?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be hard for Zoom to hear.
That was going to be my next question. Is folks on Zoom, if I step away from the mic. Now here's the thing. I've been instructed not to step away from this microphone, and I'm supposed to stay within the parameters of these flags. But here's the thing. 2 things. 1, I'm Italian. And 2, I am very, very passionate when I talk about history. And it's hard to contain my heritage and my love of history. So if I step away from this microphone and you can't hear me at home, don't panic. I will come back. It just might take me a little bit, that's all. As Americans, we like to celebrate independence. We love to celebrate our independence. We get together every year around July 4th with our families and friends. We eat a bunch of good food. We drink some good drinks. We set things on fire. And some of us take time out of our lives to learn some of the history of the American Revolution. I think it's important each and every year we don't just have good food, we don't just light things on fire, but we consider, at least for a moment, why we're celebrating our independence on July 4th. And East Tennessee Historical Society is a great place to do this. I thought we'd have some fun today. This was a luncheon invitation. Some folks brought their lunches. Some of you are waiting on lunch. That means you're a little grumpy, maybe hangry if you're like me and you love to eat. So I thought we'd do something fun, and we talk about pirates today. Are you ready? So John Adams famously wrote that the American Revolution was effected before the war commenced. He famously explained that the revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people. Today, most Americans believe that the revolution started in 1776. But look on the screen, y'all. Look at the events that occurred between 1763 and 1776. Look at all the stuff that you know about, that you've read about before. But for some reason, we stop thinking about that when someone asks us, when did the revolution start? We go 1776. Okay? We go right to the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And we skip all this. And John Adams, after the revolution, as an old man, was asked about the revolution, and he said, no, it's not 1776. It's long before that. It's this shift in the hearts and minds of Americans. And what he meant by that is in 1763, if you had taken a poll of Americans, they would have been pro-British. They would have been proud to be part of the British Empire, one of the most powerful empires on earth, that had just defeated the French in 4 wars, defeated the Dutch before that in 3 wars. They're 7-0. And I explain it to my students each and every year when I teach the course in the American Revolution, which is my favorite course to teach. I explain it to them like this. Right now, would anybody in this room be in favor of firing the UT baseball coach? You laugh at that, right? Crazy talk. Who's doing that now? Okay? In 1763, if somebody had asked Americans, hey, do you want to get rid of the British government? It would have been the same thing. We're 7-0. Change teams now? That's crazy talk. Okay? Ben Franklin writes a letter to a member of Parliament during the French and Indian War, right after they had won a major battle and it was clear that Great Britain was going to win this thing. And he writes a letter to this member of Parliament exclaiming his pride in the British Empire. Ben Franklin. And he says, look, you're going to win this war. You're the greatest empire on earth. Can you just keep in mind that America is going to be the future greatness of this empire? Can you just keep that in mind? Now, they didn't listen to Ben Franklin. But he's proud. He's proud to be British. Okay? And that's why John Adams is saying the real revolution occurs between 63 and 75, when Americans change their mind. Not all of them. And that's important that we remember that today, that our heritage, part of our heritage, is people can disagree and we can still be neighbors. Amen?
Amen.
Okay? about 20 to 30% of Americans never left the Vols baseball team. They're just riding into the 1770s and 1780s blazing orange. Okay? Never leave the home team. Right? Can't be a fair weather fan. Can't be. We fall on hard times, fine. 10, 12 years of hard times. I mean, Vols football fans, we know what that's like. Okay? We know what that's like. Things are changing now, right? Things are changing. Over this 1763 to 74 time period, Americans changed their mind. Not all of them, but Americans changed their mind. Went from being pro-British to being pro-American. That's the revolution that John Adams is talking about in people's hearts and their minds. The war that comes during and after the Declaration of Independence, that war was meant to make the revolution a reality. It's not the revolution. Now, the word pirate is not anywhere on this timeline, is it? Y'all go ahead and look. Scan that timeline. Let me know if you see it. Key events that changed the hearts and minds of Americans. Anybody see the word pirate? It's not up there. It's not on any timeline that you can Google, or at least me, I can Google. But it should be. You see, Americans stopped thinking of the British Navy and the British Army and Parliament and even the King of England. They stopped thinking of those people as protectors. Americans stopped seeing the British as protectors and started to see them as pirates. You see, one of the key arguments that historians make about the American Revolution is that Americans should not have left the British Empire. It was, in fact, not just a bold decision, but in many ways the wrong decision. Why? Because Great Britain had a powerful navy that could protect us, and that had been protecting us. And what you're doing is stepping out and away from that military protection. What guarantees do you have as a nation? None. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that those historians fail to grasp, that John Adams grasped, is that people's perception of that protection changed. And they started to perceive the protectors as pirates. For their part, the British stopped seeing Americans as loyal subjects and started to think of them, you guessed it, as pirates. Who are the pirates? We are. But also them. But we are too in the American Revolution. Now let me ask you a question. There's going to be a quiz afterwards. What do pirates look like?
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp. Okay. I mean, the latest Johnny Depp, though, it looks nice and in a courtroom in a suit, you know. Shout it out. What features represent a pirate?
Blackbeard.
Okay, blackbeard, eye patch. What else you got? Earrings. Yeah.
Wooden legs.
Okay, wooden leg. Sure. Parrot. Okay. All these things come to mind, right? Now, how do you feel? That's in your head. What's in your heart? How do you feel about pirates?
Like them.
You said you like them?
Sure.
Okay, why do you like them, ma'am?
They live their own lives in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And when push came to shove, they joined up with us.
Okay. Now she also mentioned Johnny Depp earlier. So Pirates of the Caribbean might be coloring your perspective.
Also, Yul Brynner.
Okay, Yul Brynner is before my time.
It's also the War of 1812.
Yes. Okay. Now, the word pirate conjures a lot of images in our heads. And some of you are sitting there thinking about something that you didn't even want to articulate here at our meeting. Okay, the word pirate conjures a lot of images and a lot of feelings. I mean, people feel very strongly, for example, about the Ethiopian pirates. And some of you have seen that Tom Hanks movie. Okay, and some of you know about our Navy SEALs and the job they're doing in the Indian Ocean and the Suez Canal area. Okay. We can apply these thoughts and these feelings to silly things like children's birthday parties. My daughter's 9. We've had some princess and pirate parties in our house, I can tell you that. You can apply them to silly things like children's parties, and we can attach it to serious concerns like terrorism. Between the proclamation line of 1763, which Americans resented and resisted, and the coercive acts of 1774, which Americans resented and resisted, British hearts and minds changed towards Americans. British naval officers and members of Parliament, and even the King of England, stopped seeing Americans as loyal subjects who deserved to be treated well. As Americans resisted British law after British law, the British started to believe Americans did not respect law and order. The British started to think of Americans as pirates. Now here's the really interesting part. During those 11 years, between 1763 and 1774, in the midst of all the events you see on the timeline on the screen, Americans witnessed the British Army being stationed in American cities on a permanent basis. Have any of you ever been in an occupied city in here? Okay. Have you been in a place, Michael, I'm sure you have, a world traveler, okay? Have you ever been in a place with soldiers, with guns, and military posts, military checkpoints that you have to walk through? Okay? And how did that make you feel? And did you wonder why those soldiers were there? After 9/11, I did research at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and can I tell you that that city was occupied? It was locked down. I got up for coffee one morning, just went across the street, and a soldier pointed an assault rifle at me and told me to stop. I stopped dead in the middle of the street with Starbucks in my hand, and I thought I might not make it to the other side of the street. I had no idea what I did, but I was raised Catholic. I've got Catholic guilt, and I thought I did something. And that was my first thought, was I did something and he caught me red-handed. And then I thought, wait a minute, I just went and got coffee this morning. And I'm a history professor, and I'm doing historical research at the Library of Congress on the American Revolution, darn it! And this rage boiled up in front of me, and I don't know where this come from, and I don't recommend this to anybody, but I pointed my Starbucks at this soldier. And I said, I'm not going to stop! And I walked across the street. To this day, I have no idea what that was about. None at all. But that sort of thing, that sort of military occupation, that weighs heavy on a populace, okay? Whether it's the British in American cities between 63 and 74, whether it's the northern occupation of southern cities after the Civil War, okay? Military occupation weighs heavy on a population. Americans saw the British Navy patrolling harbors, and Americans resented this military presence. Americans fought against and even killed British soldiers in American streets during these 11 years. Did you all know that? Americans are killing British soldiers in the streets. Okay, after this, Google New York City riot, 1760s. One of the best things I love teaching the New York City riots. New Yorkers are feisty, every bit as feisty as I am, and would set up liberty poles after the Stamp Act was repealed and British soldiers there tore it down. That didn't sit well with New Yorkers. Americans also fought and killed British naval officers at sea during these 11 years. Later on, Google Pitt Packet Affair. Why? Why are Americans killing British soldiers? They're there to protect them, are they not?
No.
The British Army and the British Navy are there to protect and serve, are they not? There were Americans who believed the British military was doing illegal things. Americans didn't want British soldiers quartered in their homes, eating their food, taking their jobs when they weren't soldiering. Americans didn't like British naval officers stopping their ships and searching for and confiscating contraband without warrants. Americans started to believe in their hearts and minds that British naval officers and soldiers did not respect the law. Americans started to think of the British military as pirates. And here's something amazing, right? Those of you who are students of history, you know, like when something gets in your head, you got a bee in your bonnet, and you think this might be the case. I got to go and I got to find out if this is true. And you find somebody from the past saying, here, let me give you a letter that explains to you everything you thought and dreamed is actually accurate. That happened while I was doing research for this talk. I thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to talk about pirates and be a hook and get people really interested in the Declaration of Independence and studying the history of the American Revolution? Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I talk a little bit about pirates in my American Revolution course, but not anything in depth. And I found it. I found the Holy Grail letter that you want when you're a historian. The smoking gun that you're looking for. And I'm so grateful to Mercy Otis Warren for giving it to me. Mercy Otis Warren explained all of what I'm talking about to John Adams in a letter in 1775. Mercy Otis Warren was a founding mother. She composed pro-American and anti-British plays and poems during the 1760s, 1770s that helped get Americans riled up. Mercy Otis Warren. I hope you all will Google her after this talk. She was a patriot titan. John Adams called her the quote-unquote most accomplished lady in America before the Revolution. The British Army had already shot and killed Americans at the battles of Lexington and Concord by the time Mercy wrote her letter to John in 1775. And I try to explain to my students that this is like after 9/11. Okay? The battles of Lexington and Concord, Americans have died on American soil, okay? And folks are riled up. And I try to explain that to students. Would you believe that now I've got students who don't even remember 9/11, and it's like, that's history, and we got to read about it.
It's not on there.
Like, wait a minute. Yeah, that's right. So we got to back the truck up, and we got to talk about 9/11 to then explain, okay, this is what we're talking about. That kind of fervor is already happening when Mercy Otis Warren sits down to write this letter to John in 1775. Angry American farmers and fishermen were laying siege to British forces holed up in Boston, Massachusetts. There were 29 British warships stationed off the coast of North America. These warships carried a total of 584 guns and 3,915 men. The British Navy patrolled the coast of North America, closing American ports, suppressing rebellion. The British Admiralty ordered its naval commanders to support the Army in North America by engaging colonial positions on land. How many of you knew the British Navy's shelling civilian populations in 1775? From Norfolk all the way up to Maine, what is today Maine. Why? Because there are Sons of Liberty who are active in these areas and they want to get to them. Mercy Otis Warren and John Adams both lived in and around Boston, Massachusetts, and they witnessed all of this firsthand. Then on July 5th, 1775, Mercy wrote a letter to her powerful friend John. And this is what she said. Are you all ready for Mercy Otis Warren to just speak to you across time?
Yep.
I mean, when the hairs in the back of my neck, standing up, kind of deal. This is what she said to John, 1775. The seacoasts are kept in constant apprehension of being made miserable by the depredations of the once formidable Navy of Britain, now degraded to a level with the corsairs of Barbary. At the same time, they are piratically plundering the isles and pilfering the borders to feed the swarms of veteran slaves shut up in the town. Here, Mercy is referring to the British Navy stopping American ships, confiscating food and supplies, and funneling those food and supplies to British soldiers stationed in Boston. And she calls them slaves because she doesn't believe that they're honorably and willingly doing this. They're doing it against her will. Now, here's where things get interesting. Here's where you want to start taking notes, if you haven't started taking them already. Who were the corsairs of Barbary that Mercy Otis Warren was talking about in her letter to John? Does anybody know?
Barbary pirates.
Okay. Who were the Barbary pirates, ma'am?
Didn't they come out of Algiers?
Okay, good. Good. A student of history here. Come out of Algiers. Where else?
Tunisia?
Okay, good. And geographically, where are we talking about for those not in the know? We're talking about North Africa and North African pirates. And we're also talking about Muslim pirates. Okay? The Barbary pirates weren't from Barbary, not really anyway. The Barbary coast was a geographic region that stretched along the northern portion of Africa. It encompassed the kingdoms of Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli. The Barbary pirates were people from these regions. Piracy was legal, and it was above board in each of these Muslim areas. The kings of each region got a cut of whatever was taken. They routinely stopped ships in the Atlantic Ocean and in the Mediterranean Sea and took people hostage and held those people for ransom. The Barbary pirates also took ships and cargo and either sold the ships and cargo or ransomed them. They were so numerous, so well organized, that European governments paid them money for safe passage. My friends, do you all realize that right today you pay for piracy? Do you all know that major corporations in the world pay maritime insurance because of pirates? And they pass those insurance rates on to consumers. The Barbary pirates stopping ships, confiscating goods and ships, holding people ransom. Those actions, combined with their Muslim faith, made them the arch enemy for Christians in Europe and in America. They were reviled in popular plays, in newspapers, as monsters. They were said to be barbaric. They were said to be terrorists. To compare someone to a Barbary pirate in the 1700s was akin to likening somebody to a Taliban member in the 2000s. And you all know what I'm talking about here. I don't have to explain to my students what the Taliban is, okay? So there was quite a bit of political meaning in Mercy Otis Warren's letter to John Adams about the degradation of the British Navy. And get this. Get this, friends. All of this that I'm talking about here, all of it was on Thomas Jefferson's mind when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. This maritime history mattered to Jefferson. The British Navy acting like pirates mattered to Jefferson. Barbary pirates mattered to Jefferson. It all shaped his worldview. It all shaped his personal politics. As a founding father, he both led and was swept up by the anti-British, pro-American fervor of the 1760s and 1770s. He both read and wrote about the British devolving into plundering America of her wealth and her constitutional rights. Piracy mattered to Thomas Jefferson, the chief architect of the Declaration of Independence. Are you all ready for this? I mean, grab onto your chairs. Are you ready? The big moment for today's lecture. I'm going to show you proof that Jefferson wanted to include a section in the Declaration of Independence that compared the King of England to a pirate. Are you all ready for this?
Absolutely. Amen.
No, you're not ready for this. Not just yet. First, we need to talk about the Declaration of Independence. We need to back the truck up a little bit. And we need to talk about the Declaration of Independence. I mean, this is actually why we're all here today. 1 year after the Revolutionary War began, the American Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, appointed a committee of 5 men to draw up a Declaration of Independence. That's 1 year after the war began. It's important to remember the war began before the Declaration. The Declaration didn't start the war. Congress, meeting in Philadelphia, appointed a 5-man committee to draw up a Declaration of Independence. Congress appointed, you all ready for this? Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams from Massachusetts, Ben Franklin from my home state, Pennsylvania, and Robert Livingston from New York, and Roger Sherman from Connecticut. And they were appointed on June 11th, 1776. So we could celebrate June 11th if we wanted to. And these 5 men worked over the course of June to put together a Declaration of Independence. Can you imagine being assigned this task? We want you to create a declaration that's going to go out to the world. It's going to galvanize Americans and every place around the world to support our cause. Can you imagine how nervous you would be putting pen to paper for that? And oh, by the way, people are going to be talking about this for hundreds of years. There's going to be a lecture at the East Tennessee Historical Society. Okay? And Ben Franklin writes about this moment, says it was one of the greatest moments of his life, a life well lived. But Ben Franklin said, you know, I had gout, and I was out for that whole month. I was out of commission. And here, I can't imagine that Ben Franklin just sat around and did nothing for the whole month of June while this committee that he was appointed to was crafting the Declaration of Independence. I can't imagine that at least somebody didn't go to Ben and say, hey, Ben, could you read this over and just give us some feedback? These 5 men worked diligently, put together a draft. Thomas Jefferson is known as the father of the Declaration because he wrote the thing. He took all the ideas and everything and put pen to paper. Then the committee finished their draft and submitted it to Congress for their approval on June 28th, 1776. So we could celebrate June 28th, or we could just celebrate the whole month of June as Independence Month. The roughly 55 delegates from the 13 colonies/states debated each portion of the document. That's the American way. We debate, okay? There's a war going on, y'all. American lives have already been lost on American soil. And here we are debating. Should we have independence or not? That's what politicians do. We kind of elect them, and they do what they do. This was going to be sent out to the world, Congress realized, so they had to get it right. Certain portions of the initial draft were kept intact. Certain portions were edited. And certain portions were deleted altogether. Congress then voted on declaration on July 2nd, 1776. And John Adams writes in his diary, people are going to be shooting off fireworks. He actually uses the word fireworks in his diary in 1776. It says July 2nd is going to be it. Americans are going to be in the streets celebrating, drinking, and shooting off fireworks on July 2nd. But we don't celebrate July 2nd. Why? Because Congress didn't make that vote public. They sat on it for 2 days and made preparations to make it public. Because you don't just go public with this, okay? You don't just announce to the world, hey, we are declaring ourselves independent. And they took 2 days and prepared the printing presses to print copies of the Declaration. They prepared ships to get them ready to send out to the world to make the world know Americans are standing up and declaring independence. And they made that public on July 4th, which is why we celebrate July 4th today. The Declaration explained to the world the reasons why Americans were angry with the British government, and it was an attempt to justify armed rebellion against a legally constituted government. And there are 5 parts of the Declaration. I want you all to know this. It's going to be on the test. 5 parts of the Declaration. The first 2 parts lay out the 2 basic premises for the Declaration. 1, anyone declaring independence had to state their reasons for doing it. 2, anyone declaring independence needed to demonstrate that violations of basic fundamental human rights had been occurring over an extended period of time. Not just once, but over an extended period of time. The third part of the Declaration is what I want you all to remember today. We remember that second part. And usually when you ask Americans about the Declaration of Independence, they'll say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of property.
Happiness.
That was Locke's formulation. Jefferson didn't think that sounded good. He meant the pursuit of property, and he thought everybody would just understand it, but it would sound good if we say pursuit of happiness. That's the second part. That's not even the first part, though. But it's this third part I want you to remember. It's the longest part of the Declaration of Independence. It's the bulk of the Declaration. It lists the human rights violations that the King of England had committed against Americans. It's a direct, personal attack on the King of England, and by extension, the institution of monarchy, my friends. He has done this, he has done that, he has done this. You all with me? That third part of the Declaration, those of you who have seen it before, you know it's lengthy. Okay? There are 18 grievances in that third part. 27 total charges against the king. One of the grievances had multiple parts of it. There was going to be an extra grievance. There would have been 19 grievances in the Declaration of Independence. One got cut, and it didn't make it into the final draft. This additional grievance got cut because Congress deemed it too controversial. The 4th section of the Declaration stated that we had expressed these grievances to the British government time and again, and they had not taken measures to fully address our grievances. This section, the 4th section, pleads the necessity for independence. The 5th and the final part is the formal Declaration of Independence. It stated that, quote, the United Colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, end quote. Now, are you curious about that missing piece? Have I whetted your appetites enough?
Oh, yeah.
At 12:30, when you're all thinking about food, have I made you think about something else? What did Congress consider too radical for the Declaration of Independence?
Slavery.
A radical document in and of itself, right? What's too radical for this document? Yes, don't take the wind out of my sails there.
Sorry.
Instead, can you give me a drum roll? Here it is. Here's the missing piece. And in addition to slavery, guess what? It involves piracy. You all see the piratical warfare there? Okay? Now, every historian who has studied this text, everyone focuses on slavery. Not one scholar yet has focused on piracy. I'm going to ask us to consider both today, okay? At this point, it should surprise no one in this room to learn that Thomas Jefferson, sitting down in June 1776 to write up the Declaration of Independence, compared the King of England to a pirate in his initial draft of the Declaration, and not just any old pirate. Thomas Jefferson originally included a section in the Declaration that compared King George III to one of the Barbary pirates. Jefferson compared the Christian king of Great Britain with infidel powers, like the Barbary pirates who practiced piratical warfare against Christian Europeans. What all is implied, my friends? What all is implied in comparing the king of Great Britain to a Barbary pirate? When Jefferson wrote this, what do you think he meant by this comparison? Any thoughts on this? Jefferson sitting down in June 1776 and he's saying, this SOB reminds me of a Barbary pirate. What's he thinking? Any thoughts about what's going through Jefferson's head here in June?
Well, our ship's being attacked by the British.
Okay, our ships are being
They're
attacked.
being hauled off.
Okay, our
pressing
workers are being
sailors.
pressed, thank you sir, are being pressed into the British Navy, forced against their will to serve for the British Navy and for the British Army too. Yes. Okay, that's all going through his head. What else do you think is going through his head?
He's not really a Christian.
Okay. Okay. Now maybe he's thinking, you know, I think the King of England's going to hell. And how do I make that case? Okay. And maybe Jefferson, just maybe what Jefferson's thinking here is that's gonna pull at Christian heartstrings around the world. Not just in America, but Christians around the world are going to see, look, we're fighting against another kind of enemy here in the American Revolution. Now, why would Jefferson have wanted to do this? Why would he have wanted to include this section in the Declaration? Could have been personal politics, could have been this rhetorical attempt to convince Americans and people around the world. Let me suggest this. Jefferson wanted to include this comparison in the Declaration in Part 3, in that part that listed all the grievances. It would have come last, and it would have been embedded in a large paragraph that condemned George III as a tyrant who had waged cruel war on human nature itself, even contributing to the Atlantic slave trade and the forcible enslavement of African peoples. Let's all read this controversial section, should we? Should we do it? Let's read it. Anybody in here want to take a stab at it and want to read this for me?
What do you mean out loud?
Yes!
Sure.
Go ahead, ma'am.
He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, so he's claiming the Brits were the pirates. The, oh boy,
Opprobrium
of infidel powers is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain, determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold. He has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable.
Execrable. Anybody know what execrable means?
Horrid.
That's one way of putting it. That's a delicate way of putting it. Okay, it's excrement, folks.
Yeah.
Okay? Execrable commerce. Go ahead, ma'am. And
And
that?
that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished die. He is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people on whom he has
Obtruded. Yep.
obtruded them,
Yep.
thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another.
Awesome. Let's give her a round of applause. That was great. All right. Now we need to talk about why Congress cut this paragraph from the Declaration. Can someone remind us on what continent the Barbary Coast lies?
Africa.
Okay, it's Africa, right? What does this passage have to say about the institution of slavery? Is Jefferson himself a Virginia tobacco planter and himself a slave owner, saying that the institution of slavery itself is wrong? Or is he saying something else?
It almost sounds like he's talking about the pressing of sailors into their navy.
Okay, that's part of it, but you really have to read into the lines and really have to know your history and the history of naval impressment to know that. Okay? But what's explicit here? What is he explicitly saying about slavery?
He's blaming the king for it.
Okay? For doing what, ma'am?
Still bringing the slaves over.
Okay? And kidnapping people.
Yeah.
Okay? Kidnapping people. Now, here's what Jefferson is really saying here. The Atlantic slave trade is bad. Going to another continent, kidnapping people, shipping them 3 months across the Atlantic Ocean and selling them elsewhere, that's bad. Okay? But what Virginians were doing since the early 1770s is breeding slaves to sell. Jefferson at Monticello is engaged in breeding slaves for sale. So what he's saying here is buy American. Okay? The purpose of this is to say the Atlantic slave trade is bad. Ban it. And Virginia had banned the Atlantic slave trade. Okay? Now, delegates from slave states such as South Carolina and Georgia, and delegates from northern states that shipped a lot of slaves across the Atlantic Ocean, such as Rhode Island, pushed, when Congress is debating Jefferson's version of the Declaration, they pushed to have this paragraph deleted. That's the only one that's completely deleted. It's not just edited, okay? The entire thing is taken out, okay? Can't just take out part of this, got to take out the whole thing. They didn't want Africa or Africans mentioned in any context, whether it was piracy or slavery. Georgia and South Carolina even threatened not to join the American Revolution if this passage was included in the Declaration of Independence. We got a long history of secession in this country. A lot of people don't realize how many secessionist movements there have been. Since 1776, in discussion of the Declaration of Independence, there are people who have been threatened to secede. Though it was deleted, the paragraph hinted at one of the most troubling implications of American independence. That the Royal Navy would no longer protect American shipping from assaults by the Barbary corsairs who preyed on merchant vessels. And the British government would no longer pay tribute to Barbary kings on behalf of Americans. This worry, this concern did not go away just because the paragraph was deleted in the Declaration. When Americans formally allied themselves with France in 1778, the treaty included a clause stating that the French Navy would protect American shipping from, are you ready for this? It's in the treaty with France. All violence, insult, attacks, or depredations on the part of the princes and states of Barbary. The American Revolution, the shift in American hearts and minds, involved piracy. The Declaration of Independence came close to discussing piracy outright. And the military alliance with France that helped us win the war for independence involved piracy. The United States was closely tied to the wider world through the sea. The Declaration was an appeal to the world, and piracy was a common problem throughout the world. What is more, the language of piracy, including plunder and illegal violations of people's rights, was in the air in North America on the eve of the Revolution. Americans such as Mercy Otis Warren and Thomas Jefferson considered the British to be pirates. There were piratical ideological origins of the American Revolution that were deeply moored in maritime politics. Thank you all for your time. I hope I've given you some food for thought. And I wanted to leave some time at the end for any questions. Anyone at home, if you have any questions, please post those in the chat. Anyone here with any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your participation today.
History's my favorite thing to study.
I can tell.
I study it for my own benefit. When we were in Morocco, they know a lot more about our history than we do. And Moulay Ismail, who was king of Morocco at the time of the Revolution, wrote to George Washington that he was fascinated. Why? I wouldn't know a king would be fascinated by the Revolution. And apparently Washington didn't read Arabic, so he didn't write him back. So Moulay Ismail wrote again. And finally Washington wrote him back, and they maintained a letter writing experience the rest of their lives. And Washington wrote to him about the problem of our ships at sea after the Revolution. And Moulay Ismail said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. And they
Well, he lied, because that SOB started charging us in the 1790s, and we had to pay tribute to the Barbary pirates.
But we also, when our Marines were fighting the Barbary pirates, their staging area was Morocco. Yeah. And in Moroccan customs, if they give you a gift, you have to give a gift in return. And we're the only country that ever received a gift from them without requiring a gift in return. They gave us the land our embassy sits on.
Did you see any statues over there? Any statues
None,
to Washington?
because they don't do.
They're a Muslim country.
It's a Muslim country.
No plaques.
Not where we were. We weren't up where it was.
Okay. Interesting. Anyone else? Questions? Yes,
I've got a question.
Yes, I'll come back to you.
During this period between 1763 and the start of the Revolution,
The Revolution.
what percent of the British soldiers were American loyalists?
That is a great question. So, desertion, we don't know.
I spent a year in England at Cambridge, and talking about this, it's the impression of many people in England that this was strictly an American war. The vast majority of troops, British troops, were American. I don't know if that's true or not.
This is a great question. So for those of you at home, the question is what percentage of the soldiers, the British Army and Navy, soldiers and sailors, were loyalists. And no one's ever studied this. There's a specific genre of revolutionary historians who focus on loyalism. It's the loyalist school of revolutionary scholarship. And no one studied this question, and so I can't give you specific numbers. The loyalist school says 20 to 30% of Americans. That's a percentage of Americans that were loyalists. So it would stand to reason that 20 to 30% of the British soldiers. But there's a high rate of desertion. Was that desertion politically motivated? In other words, I support the cause, so I'm going to desert and try to go fight for that cause. Or was the desertion more motivated by material circumstances, that I've taken you out of your workplace, I've taken you away from your family and your loved ones and forced you into the British military for term of service? And there was something else I was going to add to that.
What about girlfriends?
Yeah, I mean, the switching sides thing is really fascinating in the American Revolution, and I'd love to see a study, especially of these soldiers and sailors who were deserting. The desertion is such a problem in the British Navy that they have to press Americans. I mean, they know, like, we're going to have Americans fight against Americans. This is a problem. They know that, but the Admiralty orders them, and if you don't obey orders, you can face a court-martial. And the naval officers, you see letters from them saying, I personally hate impressment. And this is a horrid product, but I have to set sail, and I need my complement in order to do that. I remembered the other thing I wanted to add, and that was, you said in England there's a perception that this was just an American brouhaha with American interests and American concerns. New scholarship suggests it's also an Irish war. A sizable component of the American army that fought for independence, that George Washington is commander-in-chief of, that forms 1776, January 1, about 25 to 30% of that army throughout the entire war is Irish. That, see, not just Scots Irish, no. Okay, not Ulster Scots. And this is both people in Ireland who are getting on a boat and traveling 3 months across the Atlantic Ocean, coming here to North America to fight for the cause. It's both that, and it's recent immigrants, okay, that remember the hardships in Ireland and are fighting for interests that have absolutely nothing to do with American independence and everything to do with heritage. Other questions? Sir, you had a question, and Lisa in the back?
Well, one side note before that is that my mother's side cut and run from New York to Canada.
Yeah.
During the Revolutionary War. But
That's not good news.
anyways, my question is, the paragraph that was taken out, was there another thought by Jefferson perhaps that by discussing this and calling, this fiery language the King of Great Britain,
Yeah.
Not only France, maybe was hoping some other countries
Yeah.
would join us.
Yes. Yes. And this is a good point, that there's a fair amount of rhetoric and reality in the Declaration. There's a fair amount of both. And absolutely Jefferson's not just reaching out to the world, he's also reaching out to fellow Americans, that 25 to 30% who are loyalists, who are, die-hard, go Vols,
Yeah.
never going to give up on the baseball team, ever, okay? He's reaching out to them, too. He's trying to convince them. There's a fair amount of that in this as well. And abolitionists at home and abolitionists abroad had questioned, why is it the loudest, this is a phrase, the loudest yelpers about liberty and freedom are also the hardest drivers of slaves. Okay? Now, this gets at that without really addressing the underlying issue, okay? It gets at that by saying, look, the Atlantic slave trade and kidnapping Africans, that's all wrong. And for some folks in Congress, that even raised the specter that slavery is wrong. And you can't say that, okay? Because slavery is legal in each and every one of the 13 colonies. Every one. Okay, it's not just a southern thing. Okay, it's legal up and down. Every single one. And so what are we doing here, Thomas Jefferson? You yourself are a slave owner. You yourself are breeding slaves and selling it. Virginia becomes the largest exporter of slaves after the American Revolution. Okay? The Old West, interstate slave trade develops, and Virginia is pumping out slaves and sending them to the Southwest. Okay? With the westward expansion. How can you sit there and talk about the Atlantic slave trade and raise the specter of African slavery being wrong? Okay, that's all discussed in Congress. Yeah, and I think you're right that part of what's motivating Jefferson, a slave owner himself, who's heavily involved, part of that is that we have to appeal to people everywhere of a wide spectrum, try to cast a wide net. Lisa.
So this is from one of our Zoom audience members, Nick McCall.
Thank you, Zoomers.
Yes. So you may want to repeat just so
Yes.
Everyone can, although they can read the question. Can you comment briefly on use of privateers by the colonies as a tool, besides the new Continental Navy,
Yes.
to fight Britain at sea?
Yes, thank you. So the question was about American privateering and the extent to which we used privateering to fight against the British during the Revolutionary War. Thank you, Zoomer at home, for asking that question. It's something I talk about in one of my books. This one's about British naval impressment. And this one involves some aspect of privateering, and that is commercial fishermen who became privateers. And let me say first that privateering is legal everywhere in the world. Everywhere in the world, y'all understand me? Privateering is legal. You go to a government, you apply for a license, the government charges you a fee, and on that license, just like your driver's license, it says exactly how long you're legal for, okay, when you need to reapply, and also says what geographic region you're legal in. That license is called a letter of marque. That's worldwide, friends. Y'all understand me? But everywhere in the world, people call privateers pirates when they're on the other side. Here's this SOB and he's out there stealing my stuff. Well, guess what? You were flying an enemy flag into a theater of war and you should have known better. If you didn't, you're kind of dumb. And if you did know better and you're just using that word pirate, you're just throwing that out there, well then it means nothing to me. Okay? Privateers were used throughout the American Revolution. There's a great book on this by General Patton's grandson, who started to do some research on Rev War privateering and found out just how important it was. To a large extent, it was our sea power. We did not have a sizable navy, y'all. Throughout the course of the Revolution, Congress built 5 vessels. Okay? They worried about the cost of having navy's the biggest expense of any government. Hugely expensive. Okay? They started the war by converting commercial fishing vessels into warships. A time-honored tradition, and I argue in this book that's our first navy. That constitutes our first navy. Okay, Congress paid for the ships to be converted. Congress paid the salaries of the men. Okay? I hope that convinces y'all. If not, read the book. And Congress and every state issues letters of marque throughout the entire Revolution. And what that does is mobilize people on the seaboard to go to sea and to capture, confiscate, sell British property. We put together sea power very quickly through letters of marque. Okay? And that book by Patton's grandson has details. Zoomer at home, get that book. It details a tonnage each and every year that was captured, that was sold, and it contributed to crippling Britain's ability to provide supplies for an army 3,000 miles across the world. It crippled their supply lines. Okay? Now, another historian has argued that their supply lines were crippled already because they relied on private contractors, and the private contractors ripped them off. Okay? But it contributed to that, weakened Britain's resolve to fight, and contributed in the end to our victory in the Revolutionary War. How we, as Americans, without a large navy, without a large army, beat one of the most powerful British military forces on the planet. Privateering contributed to that victory. Any other questions? All right, everybody, then it's lunchtime. Thank you all. Hope you learned something.